On this episode of Industry Relations, Rob and I talk about sex, drugs, rock and roll, and housing. This is Industry Relations, a podcast that's at the intersection of real estate and technology from an insider's perspective, with Rob Hahn and Greg Robertson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Industry Relations with Rob and Greg. This is obviously your co-host, Notorious Rob Hahn. And with me is, I like to call him the fabulous Greg Robertson, but Saul Klein recently called him the gregarious Greg Robertson. So, Greg, how you doing, buddy?
Hola, Rob. I mean, I mumbled enough, so gregarious Greg is going to be very hard to say. So,
right? I think fabulous Greg.
Yeah. You know? Okay. It's funny. I went and saw Top Gun, and I know a couple pilots from the military, and they never get to pick. You never get to pick your own call sign, right? No. So everybody else picks it for you. So to have Rob Hahn pick my call sign, I'm not sure that's a.
That was like one of those things, man. I remember in high school there was this one kid in my school who picked his own nickname. And we're like, that's the most ridiculous thing. You do not get to pick your own nickname. You know, your friends pick your nickname for you. Right? Yeah. That's why your nicknames tend to be shit like Butthead and, you know. Yeah. Not, you know, my nickname is Maverick. Like, screw you, man. Your nickname is Tiny Dick. Exactly. Oh, man. Anyway, how are you?
You know, another day in the life here in, I'm in Huntington Beach, and, you know, we have it down here. We call it kind of June gloom. So June gloom. It'd be bright and sunny, yeah. But at the beach, it's a little bit gloomy.
Yeah. And I think gloomy is going to be a bit of our topic today. But first, we have been asked by our producers to actually promote the fact that we have both a Facebook page at Industry Relations and a YouTube channel at Industry Relations Podcast. So, hey, if you wouldn't mind, come check it out, like us, subscribe, I'll do all that so you can be notified when we upload one of these things. All right.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
And I think we have a TikTok channel, but I don't even own TikTok. I don't, so.
You know TikTok?
I don't TikTok. I think I'm past the age limit for TikToking.
No, you got to get on TikTok, man. It's kind of interesting.
Really? All right.
Time suck, though, for sure.
But, so speaking of June gloom, you wanted to start off by speaking of some gloomy news. Yeah.
I think to me the news of the day, or that I've been reading about mostly, not only in our space but others, is the layoffs that are happening, right? I mean, this could be, I think Better is the one that kind of kicked this off, and how the CEO got a ton of crap for that, and it's been rolling since then. But recently, then there's like there's a whole list. There's an article that Emin put out of I'm looking at the list now. Like, it looks like 13 names, with Callaway Mortgage, Better, Blend, Tomo, Side, Rex, even some on the Redfin via an acquisition. So, just a bunch of those things. And then, today in the news, there was something about how Elon Musk was saying that he was, had a bad feeling about the economy coming up, and thought we were in a recession now, or it's going to last, or how bad it is. So they're announcing like a 10% layoff of their staff, right? So, so I'm just kind of thinking, some of this seems to be more in the kind of mortgage space, which you can get the higher interest rates, and they have, that means the refi business is going away. That means, those types of things are going away. I'm already seeing some memes on Twitter and things about how, oh my God, my real estate agent called me after we showed up at their open house, right? So a little grass shoots that the market is changing, right? Or that that new home builders are upping their percentage to realtors, right? So we see these, we see some things that nature is healing. In a way, right?
Okay.
Who knows? Right? But we see some of that stuff. I'm not hearing such crazy multiple offer. In fact, I was reading something about the unicorn offer, which I guess is a new phrase, which means some buyers are still so crazy to kind of get the home that they're paying a high price, and it turns out they're the only offer they had, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, that as a topic to me is interesting as far as how that's going to relate. What is this? Is this really a shift? Is this the shift that we've been kind of anticipating because of the higher interest rates, or is this a blip?
Well, depends on who you ask. Right? Yeah. So there's an economist that I follow, Logan. I can never say his last name. Motashami, I think it is. And off top, I can't remember who he works for. I want to say it's like CoreLogic or something. But he's really smart. He's on Twitter. And if anybody knows, just correct me. Like make a comment or something. He's I would call him more of a bull, more of like a grass is greener type of view. And his take is, look, we need higher rates. We need to cool this insane housing market. We need to do all these things. That's one perspective. The other perspective, I think, is more gloomy, and I guess I tend to fall in that camp because my personality.
Really?
It's weird. It's like I think I'm a real optimist. I'm really white-pilled, just overall. But when it comes to this particular topic, it just seems to make more sense to me. So these are the guys who think that the Fed is raising rates and is going to cause severe recession, if not an outright depression, right? And I've mentioned him on our podcast a number of times, but I follow guys like I don't know, like Daniel Booth, or from Quill Intelligence, Luke Roman from Forest for the Trees, a lot of these macro analyst types, and they tend to have a very negative view of the Fed, right? The most recent one that I heard, I can't remember the gentleman's name, and I'll see if I could dig up the podcast YouTube that I saw, was essentially saying that the Fed is faking it all, right? That there's absolutely no way the Fed can keep raising rates. There's no way that they could do the quantitative tightening that they've announced. So it's just a charade, right? Because the Fed has done a couple of little things.
Just theater, basically, yeah.
It's theater. It's just a couple little things and then talking tough in order to get the market, in order to get the economy to cool down. I think we're certainly seeing it first on housing, right? Because mortgage rates are so closely intertwined with buyer demand. But even that, I don't know. I wonder. Here's the thing. I do think what we are seeing is the Fed action has clearly, damaged the stock market, if you will, right? So the layoffs seem fairly obvious. I was talking to a big hedge fund friend of mine, and he's like, look, the capital markets are absolutely crazy right now, right? Venture capital is like gone, the whole thing is totally and utterly changed. And you're seeing some of the drops, whether in equities, we're talking like 60% drops, right? For a lot of these big names. We're looking at just funding drying up, some of these loans, like zombie companies growing. And zombie companies are companies where they don't make enough money cash flow wise to pay the interest on their debt. So they have to roll over that debt in order to continue operating. And there are a number of them that simply won't be able to do that because rates are higher and the market's not in the lending type of mood, right? So yeah, layoffs are coming. Layoffs are here. Layoffs are coming. Probably more are coming. And basically the Fed is going to, the economy already shrank by 1.5% is the latest stat I saw. If they want to keep that going, like that's where we're headed, right?
Yeah.
And housing, I think, is the story that most people don't talk about enough. They just look at mortgage rates, they just look at housing demand falling, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, well, that's part of it. The other part of it is people, inflation's at 8% and people's wages haven't gone up 8%, right? So, and then you add mortgage rates on top of it. Like buyers are already suffering fatigue, right? How many of them are out there like, hey, even if they want to buy, can they, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. Having said that, home prices are still going up, right? Yeah, it's not like values have dropped. No.
Acceleration's not as
right.
much as it was. Yeah.
It's still
There's
going
still
up.
A supply problem, right? There's still a supply problem.
I don't know if it's supply. I mean, whatever problem is, supply problem, overhyped demand. We know it's happening, right? And I suppose it's welcome. And I don't know the areas, I heard the same anecdotes, right, as well. Yeah, we don't have many multiple offers. People are cutting their price. I'm like, okay, but what are you cutting it from? Right? In other words, like if you bought your house for $300,000 2 years ago and you put it on the market for $800,000 and we're going to drop it to $750,000, I guess that's technically a cut in listing, but it's like overall, it's still goddamn unaffordable, right? It's still 10% over what it was last year, things of that nature. Right. So I don't know. Right. And then I look at some of the markets, and I think either you and I talked about, I did a Notorious pod about this. Some of the local markets, like especially in like Florida and Tennessee and like Austin, Texas, prices went up like 45% year over year, right? That's hyperinflationary. You know what I mean? So by raising rates, are we going to get down to, what are we going to get down to, right? 20% year over year? It's still 20%. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
so,
I mean,
I don't know.
Those are weird cases, but it's a bizarre market, right? That's the whole thing. I mean, how do you account for any of this stuff, right? Inflation. Yeah, it's just bizarre. Just when you think you figured it all out, right? Like, what's happening right now? Inflation is this, interest rates are going, but house prices are still going up, and I don't know how to explain. And I don't think anybody knows how to explain it.
Well, it depends who you ask, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I know you're a big proponent of talking about how we're just printing money, and that's the root of it.
Right? I all the things I found for me, again, just me personally, I'm finding Austrian economics to be pretty convincing, pretty compelling, right? And most of that school basically says inflation is a money printing problem. And we've printed like $10 trillion we printed $10 trillion. Like it's going to have an impact, right? And I guess the real question becomes, can the Fed actually reverse that, right? They're trying. But, the flip side of that, and I think we've talked about this, man. Like, again, Luke Roman's been talking about this for at least a year, maybe longer, right? Saying, if we raise rates anymore, the federal government can no longer fund its operations. And it's not going to happen, right? Until something really breaks, until the system collapses, if you will.
Right.
Right. And there was, we're at like $30 trillion in government debt. Like 30 trillion. And I'm like, who is still buying treasury bonds? People are. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay. That works out to just under $1 million per American family.
Yeah, that's nuts.
It's like, okay. Right? And the median income is like 70,000, right? And each of us, quote, owes $1 million. Sure. I'm sure the United States will pay that back. I'm sure. Right. So,
well, everybody's we've had the Great Recession. We've had other things in our, I have a lot of confidence in this country and the people. And
I have total confidence. I have total confidence in the real economy. I have total confidence in the American people. I have zero confidence in the monetary economy and the Federal Reserve and our fiscal spending. I have zero confidence in government. So, at the end of the day, but there is an angle to this that I think is really worth talking about, right? Which is, okay, the market's insane. It's been insane for a couple of years. Things are, retrenching, and it's kind of amusing to me how so many realtors are like, hey, things are kind of getting back to normal, right? Things are getting back to health. I don't think so. Like, what's normal, right?
Yeah. I think most real estate agents never were ever in a normal market, right? Think about it. There's no cycle that's happened in such a long time. I would just question what they think normal is.
Right. Because I'm trying to think, I got into the industry in 2004, right? And at the height of the .com crash. So housing was pumping, right? Because of that. And then we had the big crash, and then we've had this insane market. So I don't know, maybe you have to go back to the 70s, right?
Yeah,
when inflation was running 10%?
Yeah.
Or do you
Yeah,
go back to the 80s, right?
90s maybe.
Maybe 90s. Is that a normal market? Or given how insane things have been, can we say the 90s were an abnormal market? Right?
Yeah.
But even so, I guess the way I look at it is, like the layoffs means wage compression, right? You know, the layoffs that you've mentioned, okay, the economy's tanking, we're going to recession, fewer jobs. It's not like a bunch of workers are all of a sudden be like, hey, you know what? I demand a 30% raise.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing here. It's just, it's so crazy and wacky. It's like, I know from my company's perspective, it's hard to find talent.
Sure.
And the talents you have will get poached by other companies giving higher wages.
Right.
And that happens, I'm sure with every company on the weekly. So
okay, but let's talk about that, right? That's under today's, or like the 3 months ago environment. All right. If Tesla's laying off 10% of its workforce, Tomo's laid off a third, Better's laid off, like there are a bunch of people who hit the streets, right? I mean, don't tell me they're all losers. They're not, right? So supply and demand naturally dictates.
Maybe, because working for a technology company, maybe that the compression, the supply of devs and things are kind of a little bit abnormal.
Maybe. Or maybe. But I think that's also going to adjust.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, there's these stories of like fresh out of college, programmers demanding $300,000. I'm like, I don't think that's going to happen. Right. Because for $300,000, you could probably hire somebody who has actual experience,
Right.
So all I'm saying is recessions necessarily raise unemployment and that necessarily suppress wages. Right. The trouble I have is you're suppressing wages when everything else is more expensive.
Right.
And even if like the Fed's fighting inflation, or we're gonna, 8.5 is ridiculous. Okay, what's not ridiculous? We're not gonna see 2% inflation. I don't know, maybe we stabilize at 5% inflation, right?
It's still high.
It's still crazy. What's gas by you? You're in California.
620.
Think about, dude.
For all this June gloom here, that's why, right?
Right. So here's the thing. What do you think gas will be in December?
I don't know. To me, they're going to always play some shenanigans with the election coming, right? So, I mean,
I know, but take that into account. What's your prediction right now for a gallon of gas, Southern California?
I can't see it going much more than this. I mean, so now you got me. I'm recording saying this. So
that's right.
When we record in December, we'll see what happens here.
So you think it'll be 620 in December?
Or lower. That would be my prediction.
Lower.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's going to be 8.
In California. Okay. Well, we're on record too. So
we're on record too. So we'll revisit it. Because again, even if the Fed does whatever it's doing, right? It's not going to bring inflation down. It's not going to go into a deflationary period, right? It's not like we're going to have, we have negative inflation now. So gas price is going to come down. And I follow a really good fintech newsletter called Doomberg. And these guys are real experts in like the energy markets. Doomberg. Right.
Like DOOM?
Yeah, like Bloomberg, but Doom. So Doomberg, the green chicken.
That is so you, Rob.
I'm not writing it. Like, I love these guys. They're so good, though, right?
Exactly.
And they have a real, like, these are guys who do like specialized consulting in energy markets and commodities, et cetera. So these are real experts, and they talk about how there's no scenario where oil prices can really come down over the next couple of years. Why? Because we haven't done the investment into the infrastructure, right? In other words, like drilling oil wells, building refineries, building pipelines. I mean, Biden canceled, whatever that pipeline, right? The very first thing he did. So even if we were to start today, right, expanding like oil production, it won't be. It'll be several months, if not longer, in order for all that supply to even hit the market. So it's like there's no scenario oil prices go down, right? I
guess that also accounts for, alternative of oil, right? it's not like there's a lot of building going on there to kind of replace what.
You mean like electric and wind and things like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and there's supply chain problems there too, right? Yeah. So Tesla, okay, well, what goes into making a car battery, right? Things like lithium. Where does lithium come from? China, right? We have a giant lithium deposit here in Nevada, right? It's going to be like 2 years before we can exploit any of it.
Yeah.
So eventually over the long run, and this is what I mean, like I believe it, like the American economy, the American people, ingenuity, we'll figure it out, right? Eventually, assuming that the government doesn't get in the way. But right now, for the next, like by December, like there's no, and I think similar things about housing, right?
Yeah. So let's circle back here. What does that mean for, let's say, I'll just try to come up with a couple of metrics here to kind of talk about. Like, I know Idris Horowitz put out their slide deck about tightening belts, and I think a lot of people in the VC community say, "Hey, when Idrisen puts out a deck about you got to like tighten your belt, it's real, right?" So, So I think a lot of vendors that may be VC funded, and we've seen that with Side and others, they're obviously have to tighten their belt. What do you think that does? Another metric, let's say, we've talked about home increases in prices, but member count with agent count. Do we still see these I
think it's up.
You think agent count's up? Why?
Yeah, because recession, unemployment.
Well, they're not typically, they're 1099s, right?
I know, that's what I mean. We've seen this whenever there's recession, right? As long as the housing market has not crashed like in 2008, people get their real estate licenses.
Yeah, but didn't like we had, I think we talked about this on a podcast where like in 2020 with the pandemic, I think we saw a surge in membership because a lot of people out of the hospitality and that type of thing. And I think we thought as things recovered, I think we're still in kind of a hangover from member counts or agent counts from that period, and they really haven't dropped off yet, right?
I think it increases. I think member counts go up
because it's like 1.6 right now.
Yeah, so it'll be at 2 million.
2 million members of the National Association of Realtors, and this is with, we haven't talked about this yet, but like with the compensation and cooperation changes happening.
Yeah, but that's still like 2-3 years out, I think.
Right.
What's funny is like I've been asked to speak on a number of things talking about that. I'm like, I was talking about that like 3 years ago, right? And everyone's like, for sure, NAR will defend us. All of a sudden now they're like, I think it was the Caesar case getting class action status. Yeah, I think people realize, oh shit, this is real. Like, no, it's been real for a real long time. But that's still going to be 2-3 years.
Okay, you think surge happens this year?
Yeah.
You think it's possible to add another 400,000 agents?
Maybe not this year,
right?
Maybe another 100,000 this year, right?
Right.
But let's put it this way: I wouldn't be shocked if by December we have 2 million realtors. Depends on the scale of layoffs in the rest of the economy.
Yeah.
Right. And
do you think, like, if you're a civilian outside of organized real estate, right, and you've gotten laid off, and you've heard stories about your friends, or maybe you were in a situation of trying to buy a house and how crazy insane it was, buyers looking at several properties, a supply thing. It's like, that doesn't sound like a business like it was in the past that I want to be in.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think you're right. I think when we see a recession, when we see layoffs, when we see unemployment go up, right, we typically see, I can understand why the roles of real estate would be, ROLLS, the number of realtors increasing. But now with all the insane stories about how the housing market is and how the supply is down, if I'm a salesperson, do I want to get into a situation where I'm a salesperson for an inventory that is shrinking and or non-existent? I don't know. I don't know if real estate has that appeal that it hasn't had in the past, right? Maybe.
Maybe, but let's say like you said, the mortgage industry got hit pretty hard, right? So these are people who already know real estate, who already know housing, right? They just got laid off from Tomo or from Better or whatever, right? And all they have to do is look around town and see the realtors driving BMWs.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty small percentage of realtors driving those BMWs, and they're probably leased, and they're probably behind on a payment sometimes, right?
Sometimes. I mean, I'm just saying you and I know the truth and reality of how hard it is. I'm saying if you don't know that, you're coming from the outside and all you see are realtors walking around with, with Mercedes Benzes, driving Mercedes and, dressed real nice and appearing on billboards and talk about, look how successful I am. Like, a lot of them just go, I'm going to get my license. And they remember, oh, wait a minute, like I do one sale and I get $30,000. Right. And if you're a salesperson, then, what do you like? This about salespeople, right? Yeah. They have this optimism and confidence, right? It's like,
I guess maybe, I'm tainted or you're tainted by, what we've been hearing that, pre-pandemic, 8% of all the, majority of the listings were being sold by the same 5 brokers, and then after the pandemic, it turned to like, 4, or it went from 4 to 8, right? Yeah. So it increased. Yeah. So everything's, the ones that are performing are getting better at it.
Yeah, the concentration of power.
Everything else is getting.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying it's. Look, I'm not saying that I would advise people to go into real estate. Right. I'm not saying that at all, because I think at this point, real estate has really become a very highly concentrated, sort of top 10% doing 90% of business type of thing. I'm just saying that like all these people that are getting laid off from various companies, they're going to look around like, where are they going to get jobs?
Yeah. And I guess I understand what you're saying. I guess what I'm saying is that I'm a little bit more pessimistic on the lure of real estate. The lure of real estate has lost a little bit of its luster since the last turnaround, right? But who knows?
I suppose you're right. But like I said, unless we think that home prices will collapse, right? And I think I'm on record as saying I don't think home prices ever go down.
Yeah.
Right. At least in dollar terms, because until the dollar system collapses, because it's just a fundamental good, right? In fact, like think of it this way: housing? We think of housing too much like as an investment, like as a financial investment. I'm like, okay, yes, there's that too, but thing is, housing is a fundamental requirement to live, right? It's like energy. It's like electric bills or gasoline. Like, look, if gas went to $10 a gallon, are people going to stop driving?
Right.
Right. If food prices double, are people going to stop eating? No. You like these. This isn't an iPad, right? This isn't a luxury car. This is like you need to have this stuff to live. Okay.
Maslow's ladder or something, right?
Yeah. The Maslow hierarchy. Like this is pretty damn low on the hierarchy. It's like food, energy, housing, right? And so even if home prices are flattening or doing whatever, okay, that's cool. What's happening with rent? Because you got to live somewhere, right? Even like unless you're gonna live in the van down by the river, you got to live somewhere, right? We're not built now. New home construction is really accelerating. Maybe all those guys take it in the shorts, but like you got to live somewhere, right? So that's. I feel like a lot of our analysis started to look at housing like some sort of financial asset only, and then evaluate it. I'm like, yeah, no, that I get it. Right, I really do, but you're forgetting that nobody needs to own Apple stock. No one needs to own Tesla, right? You do need to live somewhere. So if you don't own a house, you got to rent from somebody.
So we've talked about this on the podcast before. I think the nature of housing is really changing. It's going from just purchasing. I think a realtor needs to understand more than just a purchase, right? It's got to be, they got to understand long-term rentals. They got to understand short-term rentals. They got to understand fractional ownership. They got to, all the different things that are out there. They have to be kind of experts in for sure.
They do. And we've talked about like in the prepper call, how brokerage issue starts doing property management and all of that stuff. Here's the thing. This brings to mind, I I did a musings episode on the new Biden housing plan, right? Which I'm not sure that I understand it fully because it's pretty detailed, right? And I think I'm I'm an expert in sort of the real estate industry, but I don't think I'm an expert in like housing finance and, some of the regulations and some of the things that they got going on. Having said that, I did look through it. I'm like, there's a lot of talk in there about manufactured housing and ADUs, right? And I'm sitting here like, it kind of pissed me off, to be honest with you, right? Because the message to me was, are we essentially telling younger people, especially younger people, because let's face it, we're Gen X, we're old, right? We all already homeowners. Are we telling like millennials who are still below 40%, and they're not young anymore, right? They're not kids. Millennials are not kids. They're 30s. The oldest millennials in their 40s, right? And homeownership is still under 50%. In fact, I think it's under 40%. Are we now telling them that their version of the American dream needs to be like a trailer park? Right? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I mean, I think in part of the country, some parts of the country, that might be the case. I mean, I don't, I remember just last year, my sister was going through some stuff and found a picture of me in my mother's arms, sitting outside our trailer park home when I was born. Right. So,
right.
Everybody's got to start somewhere.
But that's my point is that's not, no one has ever said like, this should be our goal for housing. Right. This is not the American dream. American dream is not trailer in a trailer park. The American dream is not ADU in your mother's backyard. The American dream is a house, white picket fence, dogs, backyard.
Well,
right?
Okay, but just match that with what we just talked about. The definition of housing is expanding, right? Yeah. And that's, again, not just, it's expanding to beyond just purchase. I've said this before. I've got employees who want to live in Austin for 6 months, and then they want to live, in Colorado for another 6 months, and they want to do this, right? I mean, those are short-term kind of rentals. I got, fractional ownership. I mean, there's different models, different ways of looking at it. I mean, you talk about, trailer parks. I mean, I was reading about, I think we've talked about this before, where, in Palm Springs, they're kind of redefining the whole notion of what a trailer park is and having fabulous houses out there.
Sure.
In that type of thing, or ADUs or whatever. I mean, it is, I think we have a stereotype of what we think when we say that, but it doesn't mean, I mean, with good design, you would never know these things were like, pre-manufactured a lot of times either, right?
Yeah, so, I know. And
the tiny house movement. I mean, there's all sorts of things here. I don't know if we should put our own generational bias upon, what I mean, because when I hear you say that, that's not the American dream. It's hot dogs, apple pie, and I mean,
it's a house.
Get off my lawn. Get off my lawn.
Hot dogs, apple pie. It's house, white picket fence, dog.
All right. Okay. Right. So, but that's almost like your grandfather, my grandfather, yelling, from the lawn here, right? What they expect, this country to be, or what success is. I mean, that's what we think as our generation. That's not necessarily what everybody wants.
Are you sure? That's kind of what I'm asking, right? And maybe we need to bring, some of the younger folks on, right? Like, is that true?
I think the notion of remote work, I think the notion of all this stuff that we talked about, short-term, long-term rentals, fractional ownership, a lot of different ways you can do. I think multi-generational homes. I mean, how different families live, immigrant families live. I mean,
but that's
the whole thing is changing.
No, dude, I want to clarify something very, very quickly here, which is there's coping with shitty situation, right? It's like, look, I mean, whatever, my finance is the way it is. This is the situation. So I'm going to settle for renting. I'm going to settle for a tiny house. I'm going to settle for an ADU because I don't have a choice.
Right.
Versus wanting that, right? In other words, when somebody was like, you know what, I just got a job at Lone Wolf and I make $300,000 a year as a programmer, right? I can afford to buy, but I don't want to. I want to live in this high-end, whatever, tiny home manufactured house. I don't know I believe that. That's all I'm getting at. And all of the housing plans, all of the talk is like, I feel like we're trying to convince young people, hey, you should want this, right? I don't, because, it's generational bias. I want the 4-bedroom house with a half-acre lot with a white picket fence. But you, young man, you should want the little tiny house, slammed up next to your neighbor, because that's what you want. I don't know if I buy that, man. In fact,
I don't think we're forcing it on it, but I mean, there's.
Hold on. We actually have a resource that we should tap uniquely. Hey, EJ, get in here.
What's going on, guys?
EJ,
we've broken the fourth wall here, dude.
We've broken the fourth wall. He's our producer.
The curtain has been lifted.
That's right. But just so people know, EJ, you're a young man. How old are you?
I'm 23.
Okay, you recently graduated from college.
He's a baby child, is what
he's a Gen Z, right?
Yeah, you actually have a Gen Z and a millennial here.
Okay, there we go. And Lenny, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Ben Tompkins. I'm 30.
All right, so we have a Gen Z and a millennial. Help us answer this debate.
Rob, you're amazing.
Do you guys want
on the American dream?
Right, again, we're not talking about coping with economic reality. We're talking about what you want out of housing. What do you want out of housing? Ize, you first.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh,
what is your American dream?
I would like a house. I think it's a practicality thing. I agree with both of you, I think, where, it'd be great to be in a Norman Rockwell painting like Rob's thinking of, but I don't think that that's going to happen anytime.
It's not realistic.
No, I think it's a practicality issue, which I think Greg is more on that side of things. Where
that's not your want. That's not your American dream. Well, and Ben, how about you? You're a millennial.
I'd say it's same. Own my own house. I own a house out in Logan right now. It's a small, 950 square foot house. So I don't need the 4-bedroom necessarily. That's not my American dream, but to have my own place, my own property, specific kind of, my dream would be kind of away from people. But having my own little space would be nice. Yeah.
Thank you. So that's what I'm getting at.
Right? It is funny that the two here, we're crammed in this room together while you two each have your own room.
That's right.
That's kind of ironic.
Yeah.
Well, if we were together, we would be crammed in a very large room.
Well, I don't know if this settles anything. I mean,
all right. Can we let them go? Thank you, guys. We broke the fourth wall. All right. Look, the settlement is what I'm getting at is we're both correct, right? You're correct that the economic realities dictate what they dictate. I think I'm correct in saying that this is not what they want, right? What they want is the Norman Rockwell painting.
Okay, but hold on, Rob. Are you in your current shelter living situation? Is that exactly what you want, really?
What? My house?
Yeah.
No, I want.
You want something better, just like
no.
Better. I'm in a beautiful home, right? I have really all I need, but I mean, there's a lot. I go to open houses all the time. We're both real estate nerds. I want something more than what I have now, and others would look at what we have and say, well, that's if I could get that's the American dream, right? But it's everything.
No, let me answer that.
Okay.
I have achieved the American dream. Okay. I love my house. It is more than adequate. You asked a different question. What do I want? Right. And the issue there is, what does Rob want? Because Rob's a weirdo.
Greg's a weirdo also. So.
So my wants, but here's the thing. My wants are beyond the American dream. It's all I'm getting at. I've achieved the American dream, right? House, white picket. I don't have white picket fence, but I have a fence, backyard. You know what I mean? I've achieved it because I'm Gen X, right? And I got on the property ladder earlier, when that was sort of still possible on a salary, right? As opposed to having to have a unicorn exit. And then what I want is Dr. Evil's lair on mountaintop. So, you know, like I'm a weirdo, right?
with the deep basements, yes.
Exactly. You
A
know,
lot of
7
guns.
layers and submarine base, right? Helipad. Like, but that's not an American dream. That's Rob being weird, right? But, you know, when I was EJ's age, yeah, I lived in New York City in a high-rise apartment, and I was like, I love this, but that was never my American dream, right? My American dream, even then, was one day I'm going to grow up, one day I'll get old, I'll meet some woman, get married, have a couple kids, move out to the burbs for the house, white picket fence, right? Not renting the house, not an ADU in somebody else's backyard. Like I wanted, you know, my own piece of the earth, white picket fence, blah, blah, blah. My concern is that we are so busy telling young people and working class people and middle class people, you shouldn't want those things. You should want the tiny house. You should want the ADU. You should want the condo. You should want the, I'm like, but they don't want it, right? They're settling for it. And I think it's important that we at least recognize that. Right. That's all I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think especially, you know, and this is a cliche with the millennials, right? It's like they're the microwave generation, right? Where it's like they get a job and and they're there for 6 months and they say, why am I not the vice president of marketing right now? Right. And
I just don't buy it, Greg. I don't buy it.
Hold on. Right. I mean, it's not like you haven't heard that before. That's
I've heard it. I've heard it, but man, I think it's a malign rumor about millennials. I don't think that's the way they are.
So number 2, right? Right. So if you kind of extrapolate to say, maybe we're not telling everybody you should want this, but you should temper the expectation of a first-time home buyer to say, hey, listen, this might be a better alternative for you to start off with. Not ideal, but have that kind of asterisk of a first-time home buyer. And I think
starter home.
The little bit that I read was about, there was a lot of narrative in that Biden thing. I didn't read it like you did, but there was a first-time buyer, you know, kind of
tax credits and all that stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Third, this notion of the American dream, right? And I won't say it, but you know,
say it. What?
This make America great again. Like the past was where it all was, right? I'll put another slant on it. You know, there was a phrase for my generation, your generation, that I thought this was it. Whenever it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, man. Right? That was the dream. Right? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Nowadays, it's
that was not the.
Of course, it was. That was everybody. It was like that was the mantra of every movie. All the things you saw out there was like in the 80s was like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now it's like, the kids today. It's like, well, I got to get consent, and I'm now gluten free, and I listen to trance. I mean, it's just. These notions, these kind of things we've had in our head of like what should be the ideals are kind of like, again, we're old men in these things, right? And whether it's the American dream, whether it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, it's just changing. And I think we have a hard time, like everybody else, dealing with those changes.
Here's where I'm disagreeing. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll is never the dream. It was just kind of.
It was my dream. What are you talking about?
Was it really? Like you were like, hey, when I'm 50, I want to be sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
When you're young, you don't think when you're 50.
But that's my point. Like, no, look, man. Like when I was 23, yeah, of course it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Living in New York City in this tiny little walk-up apartment. Who the hell needs to own a house and get tied down? Of course, when you're 23. But even then, I'm like, but this is sex, drugs, and rock and roll in my 20s. It was never sex, drugs, and rock and roll in my 40s.
I never even thought to beyond that, right? I wasn't even thinking what young person do you think EJ, these guys are thinking about what they're going to be in their 50s? Of course not. We never thought
should we bring him back and ask him? I mean, look, are there are young people stupid? Sometimes, yes. Do they think they're immortal? Yes. Do they think they're invincible? Yes. We all did. I did, right? But all I'm pointing out is even then, man, there was always this notion of stability, family. Like one day I'm going to get past my party years and I'm going to grow up and mature and settle down, get married, and have a house.
You sound so old, Rob.
Dude, fine. You know what? If you are listening to this and you are 40 and under, which will make you a millennial or a Gen Z, I would like comments, right? Which you can make at our Facebook page at Industry Relations, and you can make on the YouTube channel at Industry Relations Podcast. I'm genuinely curious what it is that you want, right? Not just what you're settling for because of economic realities. What is it that you actually want? Is it just, I'm in my 20s, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or as Greg put it, would you put it? Consent, vegan, and listen to trance music?
No, it's not now. It's like gluten. It's like it's consent,
gluten free, and trance
podcasts. That's what it is now. The podcast. That's this equivalent of sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
I guess I still believe that doesn't matter, because to me these are human realities. I think everybody ultimately believes in their head, one day I'm going to be married, have a family, and have a house with a white picket fence and all of that. And I know we need to wrap, but man, we need to talk about this notion of the starter home, because so I'll end it with this and we'll pick up on it in a future episode. My issue is I don't believe that these manufactured housing and these ADUs and what the Biden plan is pushing in terms of construction, I don't believe that those will be starter homes in the way we think about it. The way I thought about starter home was like a small, modest 3-bed, 2-bed bungalow. It's not my forever home, but it gets me on the property ladder and it gets me going, because somebody coming up after me is going to want the same thing. I don't believe that that's the case with manufactured housing and ADU.
You think that the danger is these become the new projects?
Correct. Not only that, but I don't think that get you on the property ladder, right? If the Biden plan was more about, we need to build a shit ton more 3-bed, 2-bath little houses all over the place so that young families have a chance to get on the ladder and then work their way up, I'd be like, that makes all the sense in the world. But dude, ADUs as an example, I mean, you're in California, this is like ADU capital of the world, right? You can't own an ADU on somebody else's backyard.
Right. As an example. And that's what I have an issue with. But anyway, let's wrap. Like I said, I would love to hear from the younger listeners. Is your American dream just, what is it? Consent, gluten-free, and I should probably replace consent with monogamy, gluten-free, and podcast.
There we go. But is that really American dream, or is it still the same American dream that I had, my parents had? Well, my parents aren't American, but that Greg's parents had, Greg's grandparents had, right? Which is family, house, white picket fence, your own piece of earth. I think it is. I would love to hear from you guys.
Okay.
So, all right. Thanks, everybody. This was fun.
Yeah, it was great. I tell you, when you broke the fourth wall, I think we took off there. So that was good.
Many thanks to EJ and Ben for stepping through the fourth wall.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Ciao, everybody.